So yes, last time when we were here, we were talking about, we looked at a little bit, we did a little bit of review, with looking at, monopoly, its characteristics, how the demand curve for a monopoly is different than perfect competition, and how their marginal revenue is less than price, and also, where they set their profit maximizing quantity and how they set price. And the last thing we finished with, on Tuesday, was this idea of allocative efficiency and how the monopolist is not allocatively efficient, right? Because they don't produce, where price is equal to marginal cost. Monopolist is not allocatively efficient, right? Because they don't produce here where price is equal to marginal cost. So this, if you did this much, right, if you produced where price is equal to marginal cost, this would be a socially optimal quantity, which would be over here, right, where price is equal to marginal cost. Okay. And you would be producing this quantity of QC and charging this price PC, which is, the price is lower than the monopolist's price, and the quantity, of course, is higher than the monopolist's quantity. So because they don't do that, right? With perfect competition, if this were a perfectly competitive farm, this QC and PC is how much would be produced in perfect competition, and what the price would be in perfect competition, where demand is equal to the marginal cost. Okay, but they don't do that, right? So they charge this, they produce this quantity where MR equals MC, and they find the price by going all the way up to their demand curve and finds where this quantity hits the demand curve, and then they set their price at this level. So this creates this deadweight loss, right? Which is an, just a loss to society, because this is not going to anybody. This is not going to producers. This is not going to consumers. And all of this happens because, they're producing less and charging a higher price than it would be in perfect competition. Okay. Any question? So this is what we.
Actually, yes. What does a dead weight loss mean?
A deadweight loss is just sort of like a loss to society, because if we, let's say, if we were producing this quantity, this if we were charging this price PC and this quantity QC, what would happen? All of this would be consumer surplus, and then, where it is below your price and above your supply curve, right, somewhere here it would be your producer surplus. So this triangle right here, it would be a part of producer surplus. So some of it would be going to consumers, some of it would be going to consumers, but it would not be lost the way it is right now, because the monopolist produces, let's see, monopolist is charging this price PM, right, and they produce this quantity QM. So their consumer surplus is over here, right, which is a lot lower than the consumer surplus with perfect competition.
But isn't that bad?
That's not good, right? That's not good for society, because you are losing, right, as a consumer, right? You are having to, like, consumer surplus, remember, is the difference between willingness to pay minus what you have to pay minus the price. So this difference is a lot smart. So it's when is it great, when is it, like, when do you have a high consumer surplus? It's like you go to a store and you pick up a shirt and you don't look at the price tag, and you're telling yourself, remember, this is how much I'd be willing to pay, right? And if you end up seeing that the price is a lot lower, it's great, right? You have this bonus. But here, this consumer surplus is a lot lower because this price that they're charging is a lot higher. So it's not great for consumers. But it is.
Is it worse because it's higher? Like it's
Worse for consumers, right? But for producers for the monopoly. Let's say if this were, it's a little hard to show with this marginal cost curve, but imagine if the marginal cost curve looked something like this. That would be the supply. Okay, so all of this would be their producer surplus. Okay, so it's great for a monopoly because they capture a lot of producer surplus. This is, it's the difference between the price that they're willing to accept minus what they end up accepting. That's a great number. So for a monopolist, they have uh, lower consumers have a lower consumer surplus, but the monopolist gathers, they gain a lot of producer surplus. Okay.
Yeah.
And then this deadweight loss, so if this were perfect competition, if we were producing PC and QC, there would be no deadweight loss because all of this would either be part of consumer surplus or producer surplus. So that's what we mean by deadweight loss, is that there is this triangle created here, this welfare, like this is not going to neither consumers nor producers, so nobody is gonna capture this, so that's a deadweight loss for society. Okay. All right. So now today we're going to start with this idea of productive efficiency. Okay. So productive efficiency as opposed to allocative efficiency, right? Allocative efficiency was this idea of, producing a quantity where P is equal to MC. So that's allocative efficiency. Productive efficiency is, so when you do this, you are producing the amount that society desires, right? So this QC was the amount that society wants monopolists to produce. Okay, but they don't do that, right? So they produce less and they charge a higher price. So with productive efficiency, we are looking at producing an amount of output where your average total cost is at its minimum. Okay, so if you take a look at the monopolist graph here once again, right, they have this downward sloping demand curve, and then the marginal revenue curve, of course, it's going to bisect, right, or the it's going to, how do I say this, like cut the horizontal axis in half. Okay, so this is what the marginal revenue curve looks like, and then I draw in the marginal cost, and this is at the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost. This is the monopolist's quantity, and then when I take this quantity and I take it all the way up to the demand curve to find, this is the highest willingness to pay for this quantity of QM. So this is the price that they're going to charge. They don't charge a price right there where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, but they find price by going all the way up to demand curve and setting it, where the maximum willingness to pay for this QM is. So this is PM. This is the price that they're going to charge. But if they had been productively efficient, okay, they would be producing a quantity where ATC is at its minimum. So this would be right here. Okay, so this is how much they would be produced. And this QE, right? This QE, we call this efficient scale, like, or you can think about it like as efficient quantity or efficient size. So this is the efficient size because this is where they would be producing at least possible cost. But of course they don't do that. They don't produce the quantity where the average total cost is lowest. So they produce QE, which is, as you can see, QM is less than QE. So this difference between QM and QE is called excess capacity, which means that the monopolist is able to produce more, right? They're able to produce this quantity QE, but they intentionally choose not to. By lowering, or by restricting quantity, by producing a quantity smaller than QE, they can actually increase their price, and therefore they can earn more profit. So they intentionally do this because they know that by if I produce a lower quantity, I can charge a higher price. Okay, so this is the idea of productive efficiency, and that monopoly is not productively efficient because they don't produce at a quantity where the average total cost is minimized. Okay, any question here?
If they produce as little as possible, why isn't the average total cost minimized if they're producing as little as possible?
They're not producing as little as possible, right? They're producing where their profit is maximized. They're producing where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Okay, and if they would have been productively efficient, they would be producing where the average total cost is minimum. This is where they're producing this QM. That's not where the average total cost hits its minimum. Remember, average total cost curve hits its minimum when it crosses, when the MC crosses it, right? So it's right here. So but then now they are producing a little bit less, and they can charge a higher price, so they can make more profit. All right, so now we have this idea of price discrimination. Okay, so far, when we have been talking about monopoly, we have made an assumption that we are thinking, or talking about a single price monopoly. A single price monopoly is when the monopoly charges same price to different consumers for the same product. Okay, so when we talked about that up until now, and when we have been talking about monopoly, this is what we have been talking about, that they're always charging same price to different consumers for the product that they're selling. Okay, but in reality, we actually see this case of price discrimination, which is the practice of charging different prices to different consumers for the same product. Okay, so what are the different types of price discrimination? So there are three different types of price discriminations that we tend to see. The first one is first degree price discrimination, which is also called perfect price discrimination. Okay, so first degree or perfect price discrimination. So this is with first degree price discrimination. Okay, what monopoly farms or what doesn't have to be monopoly, right? So this type of price discrimination, we actually see them in all the other type of market structure. So other than perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, that we are going to look at later, all of them practice this kind of behavior in some way. Okay, so this the first degree is when they are going to charge each consumer their maximum willingness to pay. Remember when we talked about the demand curve, right? It is essentially your demand curve is essentially showing your maximum willingness to pay, for different quantity, right? So for someone who's over here, their highest willingness to pay is this price, right? For somebody over here, their highest willingness to pay is lower, at over here, right? So different people have different willingness to pay. So what with first degree price discrimination, a monopolist actually engages in this kind of practice where they will charge each consumer their maximum willingness to pay. And if you can imagine, this is very hard to do in real life, because it involves the farm essentially knowing how much, what is the maximum price that you're willing to pay for something, right? So you need to gather a lot of market, you need to have a lot of data essentially for most type of market. Okay, or for most type of products, you need to gather a lot of data about people. But then the most common type of examples where we see first degree price discrimination is like maybe car dealership. Okay, so when you go to a car dealership, you want to buy a car, you are gonna talk to a car salesman, right? And they're basically doing what? They're trying to understand, they're talking to you and they're haggling with you, and they're basically trying to understand, what your maximum willingness to pay for that car is, right? It's not necessarily that everybody pays the sticker price, um, for the car, but each consumer, right, because with a car dealership that you're talking to, one salesman, they can actually do that, and they're actually gonna charge each customer that come in their maximum willingness to pay for that car. Okay, so this is how something like that is achieved. And then you also see this in auctions, where uh, when they're auctioning different products, people are sitting um, in rows, right? And everybody, they bring out a certain product, and then people let them know, right? Everyone is letting the auctioneer know, what their maximum willingness to pay for that product is, and whoever pays the highest price, the product is sold to them. So that is another example of first degree price discrimination. Second degree price discrimination is when you charge different price to different consumers based on the quantity consumed. Okay, so I think this is an example of, I guess, with electricity. So with electricity, what happens is the first 100 kilowatt hour is charged differently, like if you use the first 100 kilowatt hour, you are gonna pay a higher price than if you use more than 100 kilowatt hour. So the next hours, right after 100 kilowatt hours, you're gonna be charged a lower price, because the idea here is that that first 100 kilowatt hours of electricity is basically essential to your living, right? But the next, whatever amount you buy, whatever quantity you buy, it's probably not going to be as essential. So that's how they are charging different prices based on your quantity that you're consuming. And third degree price discrimination is when they charge, the farms will charge different prices to different groups of consumers based on their relative elasticities of demand. Okay. So one example would be senior tickets and adult tickets at movie theaters, right? Hopefully you guys know that adults are charged a higher price and seniors are actually charged a lower price. It's not just movie theater. Seniors are usually charged a lower price in most places, right? Because they have less income available, right? um, also, so what the monopolist is essentially doing is they're somehow able to segment the market between adults and seniors, right? And this is very easy to do, because if you're a senior, and it's based on age, right? You can essentially look at a person, and you can determine whether a person is a senior or not. Also, another example of third degree price discrimination happens with airline tickets, right? So business travelers they actually usually pay a higher price than tourists for airline tickets, because if you think about it, tourists usually purchase their tickets, airline tickets, at least in advance of time, right? In advance of their travel. Whereas if you are a business person, and also a tourist, will usually go somewhere, and they will stay over the weekend, and that makes the price a lot cheaper. Whereas a business person, you might not necessarily always be able to purchase your ticket well in advance of time, and they don't necessarily stay somewhere over the weekend, because businesses don't happen over the weekend. So they this is how, like, depending on your travel date, and how much ahead of time you are booking your tickets, airlines can actually do this kind of price discrimination very easily. Okay, they can separate customers in different groups. So some conditions for successful price discrimination to work would, of course, you would have to be some sort of a price maker. So you are going to have to be able to influence the price somehow. So this is why, it wouldn't work with perfect competition, because of course they're price takers, they're not price makers. And they have to be able to segment the market, based upon either people's willingness to pay or elasticity of demand. And also they have to be able to prevent resale between consumers. So somebody who paid a lower price, for their airline ticket must not be able to sell it to somebody who paid a higher price, right? Because that defeats the purpose entirely. So they're gonna have to, usually, this is what happens. Airlines tickets are usually not transferable for different people, right? Um, any question so far?
No.
Have I lost you guys completely, or you're just taking it in?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. So let's take a look at an example of third degree price discrimination, which is, you are when you charge different price to different groups of consumers based on their elasticities of demand. So remember when we talked about elasticity, we looked at, price elasticity of demand, and what happens when your demand curve is very flat. Is it elastic or inelastic? And what happens if your demand curve looks like this?
Elastic.
Which one?
The first one is inelastic and the second one is elastic.
Oh, so close. It's actually the other way around. If it's flatter, right, the more flatter it is, the more elastic your demand is. Okay? Because let's see. And then this one, the more steep it is, okay, the more inelastic it is, right? The more, the less responsive to price you are. If you are more elastic, okay, if your demand is flatter, it means that you are very responsive to price. Okay, so here what we are looking at is adult movie tickets and senior movie tickets. So as you can see, the marginal cost curve, that all the cost curves, they are exactly identical to each other. So where third degree price discrimination comes from, it is not related to the cost curves at all. The only difference is that there is different willingness to pay, or the other way of saying this is that there is the elasticity of demand for these two groups are very different. Seniors have more elastic demand, okay, because they have lower available income. So if the price was a lot higher, they would not have demand for movie going to movies at all, right? Whereas adults, because they have higher available income, they tend to have they tend to be more inelastic. So even if prices were to rise a little bit for movies, they wouldn't probably decrease going to the movies by as much. Whereas seniors would probably do that. If they saw that prices, have for movie theater have gone up a little bit, they would probably uh, not go to the theater at all. Okay, so here what we see is that, for this is the demand curve, right? For if we're looking at adults, right, they have an inelastic demand curve, and of course an inelastic marginal revenue curve. And the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal costs gives us the quantity of adult movie tickets. And going up from QM all the way to D, where it touches D, that's where we find the price that's going to be charged for adult movie tickets. Same idea here. This is the quantity of tickets sold for seniors, and then this is the price of movie tickets for seniors. So as you see here, right, the price of movie tickets for adults is a lot higher than the price for seniors, right? So would it make sense to charge this adult price to the seniors? What would happen if I charged a price over here? What do you see? Is there a demand for this product at this price?
No,
No,
no.
there is no effective demand at all, right? At this
What do
high
you
price.
mean that
Sorry?
you would lose money because they wouldn't pay that
They wouldn't
price?
pay, like there is no demand, which means that they're not coming to the theater at all if the price is like the same as the price for adults, right? Because it means demand, the highest willingness to pay for the movie tickets is over here, right? They're not gonna there is no demand essentially for movie tickets at this high price. So you're gonna lose all of those seniors like altogether, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't make sense, right, to charge the senior price to adults, right? Because let's see, what are you doing essentially, right? Your marginal revenue is not changing, your marginal cost is not changing, your average total cost is not changing, your demand is not changing. What you're doing, you're just setting your price like arbitrarily. If you were to do it, this is hypothetical, like if you were to do that, what would happen?
You lose money.
Yeah, so you're making less profit than before, right? So before, the profit would be like um, all of this, right? And now if you charge a senior price, your profit would essentially be like only this box, right? So you are actually losing, right, money. So it doesn't make sense for you to charge um, the senior movie ticket price to adults, right? Because you're essentially doing yourself a disservice, because adults have higher willingness to pay for movie tickets. They have inelastic demand. So by segmenting these two markets, okay, the monopolist is actually able to make more profit than if they were to charge like one single price for movie tickets. Okay. If you charged one single price for the movie ticket, you would see that at least either the seniors or the adults, it's like you would essentially be losing your profit. Okay. But you can actually gain more by charging two different prices for two different groups.
Yeah,
Okay.
because we should charge accordingly to who we are charging
Sorry, what was that, Sarah? According
to the person that you're charging it to.
Yeah, so according to the elasticity of demand, right? So they have, so this is what want you to understand from here is that this is not about like senior individual, right? This is a whole group of seniors, right? So anybody who comes in. So this is different from first degree price discrimination, because this is not about individuals, but this is about groups of people, right? They're separating them into groups, adults and seniors. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Then, yeah, this is what I just said. Okay. So then we're gonna take a look at this case of natural monopoly a little bit. So we discussed this a little bit when we talked about, why there are barriers to entry in a monopoly market, and why it makes more sense for one farm to meet the demand for maybe an entire city, um, then it would be if there were more competing farms. Okay. So this idea of natural monopoly, or why it is better for there to be one farm, comes from economies of scale. Okay. So do you guys remember what were some examples of natural monopolies that we talked about?
Um, I'm thinking about it. Mm,
Hmm? Okay, yeah, that's fine if you don't remember. So natural monopolies, right? Usually we talked about, public utility companies, such as, those companies that provide, water or electricity. We usually see them exhibiting characteristics of natural monopoly. Okay, so we said that if with natural monopoly, right, they tend to have economies of scale, which means that the long run average cost declines as you increase your output. Okay, so here, if you think about a natural monopoly, which is, so let's say this is the natural monopoly, and this is when there are no competing farms in this market. So if this is an electricity provider, so let's say that they're the only ones providing electricity to a city, right? So if they're the only ones, they're gonna service all of the demand in the entire city. So let's say they produce, right, or they produce at this quantity Q2, or this would be like the number of customers they are servicing. So they're servicing this many customers at Q2, and the long run average cost associated with servicing Q2 customers is this LRAC2, right, which is really low. But then if you had increased competition, okay, so which means that that the demand hasn't increased, right, that number of customers is still the same. So what that means is that if you have another farm coming in to serve, or to provide electricity in that same city, it's just you're going to be dividing up the customers between the two of you now, and each one of you is going to have maybe half of the customers. So for the monopoly, natural monopoly, right? So at first they were producing Q2 at this, average cost of LRAC2. Now they're going to be producing less at Q1, and the average cost associated with this Q1 is a lot higher. Okay? So it's over here.
Okay.
So then this is a situation, because with a natural monopoly, because their average total cost is declining as they produce more and more, so it makes sense for there to be just one farm meeting the demand, meeting the entire demand for that service, right, rather than there being two competing farms, because the average total cost is going to be higher, and there's not going to be enough, you know positive economic profit for everybody. So this is a situation, where it makes sense for there to be just one farm, because they have massive economies of scale. Okay, their long run average cost declines as they produce more and more and more. Okay, of course, it's all not that more and more. Of course, they also have this happens, it goes up eventually, but up until some point, it's gonna be the case that their average cost is declining. Okay.
I have one question.
Yeah.
What happens, like, if another market comes in, if another firm comes in the monopoly market, and but like it lowers the price, so wouldn't they have more profit than the original firm?
You mean with the natural monopoly? That's what we just saw. That they're gonna have to. What is essentially happening, right? So with natural monopoly, remember, I'm sorry, not monopoly, right? With monopoly, right? They're the single producer of a good or service. That is what makes a monopoly, right? And it is very hard for other farms to come into this kind of markets. So that's why we don't really show shifts by as imagining what happens when other farms come in. So this is just to show you as an example of what would happen to the average cost with a natural monopoly. So natural monopoly, is when a farm has average cost, right, long run average cost that is declining, as they produce more. Okay, so with the natural monopoly, we're essentially just trying to demonstrate here, that it would disservice the community, because the long run average cost would be a lot higher if this monopoly was producing or servicing half the community, and then other firm, right, which might not be a natural monopoly. So they probably don't even have this kind of long run average cost curve, right? So they would be producing or meeting the demand for the other half of the community, and they're probably going to be charging a lot higher price, because it is not easy to be a natural monopoly. They have a lot of high fixed costs, okay, because it is enormous amount of money that they have to spend to make lay out the pipes for water, or to set up wires for electricity, and then distribute them to all the homes. So it's really not easy to become a natural monopoly, right? You have high fixed costs, and then the cost of adding additional customers is really low, which is why they can you know achieve this thing where their long run average cost is declining as they add more and more customers. Okay, any
Yeah.
other question?
No.
Okay, so now quickly let's take a look at like we saw that this natural monopoly, it's good for there to be one firm to be you know producing or meeting the demand for um, a service. But then sometimes the government actually decides to regulate monopolies. Okay, natural monopoly, they will tend to regulate natural monopolies, and here is why. Okay, so if we have an unregulated natural monopoly, okay, so imagine this is the average total cost curve, which is declining, um, all along the demand curve. So you have your monopolist demand curve, the marginal revenue curve, the marginal cost curve, and then you have the average total cost curve, which is essentially declining along the demand, right? And then, so if we left the monopoly, right, if we didn't regulate the monopoly, the government just left them on their own, this is what would happen. The price that they would charge is this price at PA. The quantity that they would produce is this quantity QA. Okay. So you understand that this is an essential service, right? Electricity, water, these are kind of essential to our lives, right? So now what they're doing is they're charging a really high price, and they're not really producing enough. Okay, so the government notices this, and they're gonna come in and they're gonna say to the monopolist, like, hey, natural monopoly, right, I see what you're doing and I don't like it. You're not producing enough to service the entire city. Your quantity is too low, your price is too high, so I'm gonna regulate you. I want you to set your price, okay, equal to your marginal cost. Okay, so they're going to say, like, I want you to find the intersection of demand and marginal cost, and this is the price that you're going to charge, and this is the quantity that you're going to produce, and this is what we call marginal cost pricing. Okay, so where you set where you the price is found by the intersection of marginal cost and demand. Okay, so then, as you can see, this price is a lot lower than the monopolist unregulated monopolist's price, and the quantity is actually a lot higher, right? So essentially this is the socially optimal quantity, or P is equal to MC. This is socially optimal. This is how much society wants the monopolist to produce. So this is great for society, but it is actually not so great for the monopoly, because what do you notice about the price, this level of price and the average total cost? QC, right? The average total cost of producing QC is over here. Okay, so it's like somewhere here. So if your price is lower than your average total cost, what does that mean for you? Are you making profit or loss?
You'll be losing money.
You're losing money, so you're making loss, right? Because your total revenue is less than your total cost. So that's not really so great for the monopoly. The monopoly will then be like, hey, government, this is great. You came in, I'm producing more, I'm charging a lower price, but look at what you did to me. I am now losing money all over the place. I'm at a loss, I'm not going to be able to sustain this. I have to go out of business really soon, exit this industry. And then what you're going to do, there is nobody achieving this kind of, average, like long run average cost economies of scale. So, the government has an option, right? What they can do is, they can usually they will subsidize the monopoly. Okay. And when you provide a subsidy, right, what you do is you bring down your marginal cost and also your average total cost, right? So these two curves is going to shift downward. And, of course, um, then they're not going to be making losses anymore. Okay, so this loss is not going to be there anymore. So this is one way that the government can regulate the natural monopoly by having them, charging a higher price, but lower price and a higher quantity, socially optimal quantity. Okay, but of course, they have to provide them with a subsidy, and the subsidy is not free money. This has to come from the tax revenues that we pay to the government, right? So there are certain advantages of doing this marginal cost pricing by regulating the monopoly, but then there are also drawbacks because of this tax. They're essentially taking it from our tax that we pay. Any question?
No.
Okay, so just one more slide, okay, and then we can go. So that was marginal cost pricing, and the other way, the second way that the government tries to regulate a monopoly is by something called the fair return pricing. Okay, so this is when the government tells them that, okay, you know what, I want you to set your price equals to average total cost. So not marginal cost, but your average total cost. So the farms, they're essentially, finding, they're essentially setting price, where, this at this level of PB, which is where the demand curve intersects the average total cost curve. Okay, so this is the price PB that they're going to charge, and this is the quantity QB that they're going to produce. Okay, so from here, this is different than the marginal cost pricing. If I were to put marginal cost pricing on the same graph, right, the cost pricing would be, at the intersection of marginal cost and demand, right? So it was like somewhere over here, and this is the other quantity Q. So this is, let's say this is QMC, and this is PMC. So with PMC and QMC, the monopolist had a loss, right? But at PB and QB, right, their price is exactly equal to their average total cost, which means that total revenue is equal to total cost, which means what? Do they have profit or loss or what?
They don't have, like, neither of it. It's
Yeah. What do we call that?
I think normal
Yes, great.
economy.
Yes, they have normal profit, or we also call it zero economic profit. Okay, so the government is barely, barely letting them charge a price where they have a fair return. Okay, it's fair. They're just breaking even. They're earning, they're earning their opportunity cost, and they're earning, total revenue is equal to total cost. So they're just letting them, earn a fair return. Okay, so that is another way to regulate a monopoly. And then with this scheme, of course, they don't have to subsidize because there is no loss. So there is no, you don't, the government, like, sorry, tax, they're not using tax revenues either. So I guess this is I think more common, the fair return pricing. Okay, this is all that we had on our discussion of monopoly. Do you guys have any questions I can answer right now? Because we're done with monopoly. Anything that you don't understand, now would be a good time to ask.
Mm.
No? Hello?
No.
No? Okay.
Mm.
All right. Yeah. If you think about something, you're feel free to ask me questions. At any time. If something comes to your mind next week, that's fine too.
Okay,
All
thank
right.
you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
See you guys next week.
Okay, thank you. Bye.